Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel if this is your first time. Hopefully you stick around for more videos to come. Today we're going to talk about clutches, diagnosis of issues with clutches, what they mean, and often what the repair process involves. So first of all, we're going to look at what a clutch is and what they look like when you buy a new kit. So normally they'll come in a packet like this. Obviously this one's seen better days. But inside, here we have the pressure plate, and next to that is the friction material. This is the part that usually fails. There is often also a slave cylinder. There is often a throwout bearing. In this particular clutch kit's case, it's a two-piece, so you've only got these two. Luckily though, I have a throwout bearing from another vehicle. So essentially what this does is this will be sitting just inside your gearbox. So let's grab the gearbox that it came from. Inside here you'll have your clutch fork. That will sit up through here, which will then be pushed on here by your slave cylinder. So when you put your foot on the pedal, you push the master cylinder, which will then put high pressure hydraulic fluid through, which will then push on the other cylinder. And as you can see, when I push on it, pulls it forward and back. So this fork here will ride in there, like that. And as you push and pull on that, it'll pull it forward and backward, like that. What then happens is you see in these ears here, they'll wedge over these little ears on the throwout bearing, which will sit over here. And as this pushes, it'll push this bearing in and out. And it's very important that this is a bearing, because this will end up spinning at the same speed that the engine is. So potentially, if you change gear at redline, this may have to kind of cope with going up to around 7,000 or 8,000 RPM. Sometimes more in some cars. So it's got to deal with it a lot. What then happens is the pressure plate. So this will be bolted up to the flywheel. So on here, although this is an automatic engine, this simulates the flywheel. So on an automatic, it's called a flex plate. But imagine this is a bit thicker and has a nice smooth flat ring surface around here. So that pressure plate would roughly sit there, like that. It would then be bolted in all of these points, with the friction material sitting between the two. So when you haven't got your foot on the clutch and you're not pushing that bearing out, this will be pressed up hard, because these are very, very strong finger springs in here, which push this plate out. This plate will then clamp the friction material up against the flywheel in a manual car. So this would sit there. So you can see this outer surface here compresses on the friction material, and then this friction material would then be pushed into the smooth surface on a manual flywheel. So now we've gone over the basics of how they work. The most common symptoms are difficult to get into gear, pedal drops to the floor on the clutch. Sometimes you can have issues kind of getting in, grinding noises. The gears will only go into gear when you've got the clutch pedal pushed the entire way down and barely any movement up. And the other one is often, if you're sitting there with the engine off, you can put it in and out of gear absolutely fine. As soon as the engine's on, it will not go into gear at all. So the main reasons for a lot of them are just worn friction material. So when this material here wears down, so you can see at the moment there are these grooves and indents and the actual friction material there. So it's two pieces sandwiching a couple of pieces of metal down the middle. Those are for strength. This is made out of an organic material held together in a composite form and then basically heat compressed on and then rivets to hold it in place properly. Often once you're down to the point where the rivets are now rubbing on either your flywheel or on here, it's pretty worn and it's very likely that that's going to be what your issue is. Obviously you can have other issues with some other components, so another option is either a failed master or slave cylinder. So those have basically a piston inside that when you push your foot on the pedal, it will then push this piston, which then forces the hydraulic fluid through. If the seals on the piston have failed, then it'll be basically bypassing oil, so you won't be efficiently transferring energy or the fluid through properly, so you'll lose some of that pressure. Same with the slave cylinder. If that's started to leak internally, you'll have a lot of issues with putting pressure in, but it's just going to bypass straight back round. So what I've got here is the master cylinder for the clutch from my 300ZX. This is a slightly more complicated one because it has a booster to basically reduce the amount of effort required to press it, but the main part of it is exactly the same. So it'll sit like that in the engine bay, and when you put your foot on the pedal, the pivot will be up here, and then you push, the pedal will be here and press this in, which is connected directly to the piston inside here. You've got the fluid that comes down here, so it's got its own little fluid reservoir. Most modern cars don't. They have a joined fluid reservoir between clutch and brake system. So this one will then, you'll push the piston with those seals through the bore inside of here. That will then force the fluid out, which will then go down the clutch line into similar like to this, but instead of you pushing the piston, the hydraulics that you've already moved will then push the piston that way, which then pushes on something like that, which will then do that. So if any of you have seen that trick with the syringes, so you get two syringes facing inwards with a piece of tube over both the ends, and you fill it with water or even air, but water's better, and you push the plunger on one of them, the plunger on the other will push out. It's exactly the same system on how brakes and clutches work, hydraulic clutches anyway. Those are your most likely causes and symptoms of clutch issues. Obviously you want to first make sure that you haven't run low on clutch fluid, you haven't got a leak somewhere. Same with your brakes, because they're pretty important really. Also, sometimes it may be worth doing a gearbox service. They are nowhere near as scary as people think. You can look online and find where the drain and fill plugs are. And as most gearboxes take, well, manual ones take anything from 1.5 to 2 litres, give or take. Again, a quick Google search and you'll find all of that. So that's not something to be worried about at all. But often, if it's a bit kind of clunky or it's sticky, it feels like you're kind of like changing the gears through treacle, then it may again be worth just cleaning out as much of that gear oil as you can, and then putting some nice fresh stuff in. I've done it on a handful of cars with that issue, and it makes a world of difference. A lot of people do not service their gearboxes regularly enough. People always kind of change their engine oils every year, 10,000 miles, whatever. But gearboxes, they're neglected. They are. So the first port of call is always, for the sake of £15, £20, just go and get some new gear oil. It's the most basic thing to change. It's usually one drain bolt right at the bottom, and then halfway up on one of the sides or the back of the gearbox. Obviously, look for your specific one first. But there's just 2 bolts, and then it's easy enough. Obviously, before you release the drain bolt and lose all your oil, make sure you can get the fill one out. Sometimes they're a bit seized in place, especially if they've never been taken apart before. And the worst thing you can do is drain all your gear oil and not then be able to refill it again. So do the fill plug first, then the drain plug. Otherwise you are in for a very bad day, I promise you. So generally, to repair most of these things, it can be quite pricey. To do a proper clutch job, depending on if you've got a concentric slave cylinder, which means your slave cylinder is built into that throwout bearing. It's all in one unit, which is inside the gearbox. If you need to do a slave cylinder on one of those, you may as well do a full clutch kit, because you've got to take the whole gearbox off anyway to do the slave cylinder. If it's one of the externally mounted slave cylinders, like the one would have been on that gearbox I showed you, they can do it pretty easily off the side, and they can vary anything from 50 quid up to 150 quid. Again, these sorts of things, often you're best just getting a really good quality one from the beginning. So you've got LUK, which is the one I showed you over there. You've got Sachs, SACHS, they're often an OEM brand, and Vallejo. Again, they do most OEM stuff for especially a lot of VWs. And LUK do a lot of the dual clutch stuff and a lot of the flywheels and everything as well. So a good quality one is really important. Slave cylinders, especially concentric slave cylinders, if you don't get an OEM style one, they will just cause you issues. I've had that when working on a Vauxhall Vivaro. We got still a good brand, but not LUK OEM. And it just did not fit. It kept leaking despite the fact that we'd installed it the right way. We then took the gearbox back off, got an LUK one, which ended up only about £10 more. Fitted that instead, and it was absolutely golden. Not an issue at all from that point on. If it's the actual clutch material, there is no way around it. You have to take the gearbox off, replace the clutch plate, the friction plate, and the pressure plate. And I would 100% get the 3-piece clutch kit, so it includes the new bearing, because there's nothing worse than doing all of that and then a few months down the line your throwout bearing fails, and then you've got to take the entire gearbox back off again to fit a new one, which, if you don't do the work yourself, is going to cost you hundreds of pounds, probably £300-400 easily in labour just to do it. Master cylinders, again, they're often £150, give or take. They do vary so much depending on what car it's for. Fitting them, again, depending on which car, it's often a bit of an arse. I will show you on this. So on my 300 here, the clutch one will sit down here. When the engine's in, there's not a whole lot of space in there. So it can be a bit awkward. Sometimes they are actually inside the car, and they will be mounted right up there where the clutch meets up with the firewall. Obviously this one is currently automatic, or has the automatic pedals and everything still in it. Therefore, you obviously won't get a full appreciation for it, but hopefully you get the idea, the gist of what it would be. It's either inside, right underneath the dashboard, or it's going to be in the engine bay, and sometimes they'll be really nice and easy to get to. A couple of bolts, a couple of hydraulic lines, and it's out. Sometimes it will be a lot of fighting, getting your hands caught in awkward small places, and often hydraulic line nuts are quite weak and soft, so you would be best getting a flare nut wrench or a set of crow's feet. That's these. So you see, instead of just a normal spanner where it's got one side, another side, and then a rounded bottom bit, you've actually got four of the sides actually properly cut, and then you've got that corner and that corner up there. Essentially that gives you much more purchase on the nut and stops you from rounding it off if you have to put a load of force into it, which a lot of people do if they're using just a standard box spanner. These are worth their weight in gold. Also means you can put a 3/8 ratchet on them, and it makes it easy. You can add extensions if you don't have access, so it's more convenient than a spanner as well. We'll also say these are not the right things to be using to get those nuts off for the hydraulic lines. They are not. All they will do is absolutely destroy it, because like I said, they're really soft. And these are very strong, hardened, sharp teeth, but they're also not in a hex pattern. So they are literally just going to bite in wherever they bite and absolutely destroy it. So if you do plan on doing it yourself, make sure you have the right tools, because though that set of crow's feet I think was only about £20. You can get flare nut wrenches for a set for £15-20 again if you go on Amazon. You can get brand like Laser, they're pretty good. And it's a small investment initially, like I said, a very small investment, but anything you do on brakes, so if you ever have to undo hydraulic lines for the brake system, for the clutch system, anything, then they are going to save your backside. They really are. So make sure you get some of those too. But anyway, I think that will pretty much cover everything that you need to. Obviously, if you've got any comments or questions, please ask them down below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video and it's helped some of you out. Again, questions, comments, please put them down below. If you fancy seeing the internal workings of an automatic gearbox, click up here. And there's a whole load of playlists on all of the different vehicles that I'm currently working on. Some old Jap things, got an old classic Land Rover as well. We're going to be doing some more bike stuff in the future, and we've got some slightly more modern Jaguar stuff. So I'm sure there'll be something for everybody. But I hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you soon.